In this video, we're going to take a look at the MrPen or Italix brand Chaplains Tankard. Let's jump straight to the end with my thoughts on this pen. I can say that I find this pen a little heavy in my hand. Now, that in itself isn't really a problem. It's just something to be aware of if you prefer heavier pens. I do like the girth that it typically has. What I don't care for is the ridiculous blind cap, only because I never use it. I always just take the body off since I can see the converter fill up completely. Now, I don't see a need for this to have a blind cap, but it does, so it's there. Now, I got this pen because of the specialty nib options you could get, and at a very affordable price, and for that, I am incredibly happy. Now, while the oblique italics isn't really a nib I'm very good at writing with, there's not a single problem with this, and when I'm using it well, I do think it adds a lot of character to the writing, which makes this pen really a great pen in my opinion. Low price with a specialty nib to try out, you can't ask for a whole lot more. Now, you can only get them from the retailer MrPen, or at least at the time I'm making this video, that's how it is. Now that we know how I feel about the MrPen Chaplains Tankard, let's see how I got to that opinion, starting with the unboxing. The MrPen Italix Chaplains Tankard came in a box like this. The boxing in itself was pretty minimal and really sufficient for getting the pen to me. It's a rather robust pen, so I don't think you have to worry about it really being damaged in the mail, and this box did its job. Also helps it store nicely. With the pen out of the box, we need to get to the nib. And as long as it doesn't take 20 turns to uncap a pen, I'm generally okay. But how many turns does it take to uncap this pen? The MrPen Italix Chaplains Tankard takes 1 3/4 turns to uncap. At the 1 3/4 turns to uncap, it is a little more than is my preference, but it's not something that would stop me from using this pen on a day that I'm going and I'm taking a lot of notes. So for that, it is really good. It's really, once you get into that more than 2 turns, I think I start to notice it and may pick up a different pen. This gets us to the nib. This pen has a steel oblique italics nib. As I stated in the very beginning, this pen was purchased for the nib, to try that out, and it is a very nice writing nib when I don't have problems with it. It's me, but if I were to hold my pen properly for it, it would write flawlessly, and when I'm holding it properly, it does write flawlessly. Very nice nib, and it looks good too. If you enjoy videos like this, then be sure to hit the subscribe button. Now, let's ink this pen up. The MrPen Italix brand Chaplains Tankard is a standard international cartridge or converter and holds approximately 0.7 milliliters of ink. The ink for today is Sailor Black of Score. It has a standard international converter that's not branded, and I do have to say that I tend to prefer proprietary made converters even if they are standard international. I find when a brand makes their own, they tend to be a little bit better quality. As a habit, I don't normally post my pens, but some people prefer to post their pens, and some pens need to be posted in order to be used comfortably. This pen could post, maybe. It's very tight here. You'd have to push, and this is an all-metal lacquer pen, which makes me feel like if I do that, I'm going to wind up with a very back-heavy pen, which it is. I don't use it posted. It's got a nice weight to it. It's thick enough to be comfortable in the hand, and it does come back far enough to write with comfortably. But I suppose if you had to, you could post your pen. Now, the important part, the writing sample. I've mentioned it a couple of times that any issue that comes up with the nib while writing is really user error. It's me and not the nib, and that's because I tend to actually hold my nib straight up and down to the paper. So with that, I write directly underneath most times. When you see me writing, it's even with the camera overhead, I wind up at a weird angle to make sure I'm out of it. Now, especially at that weird angle, it becomes a little more obvious of when I have problems with using a oblique italic nib. Very happy with how it writes, nice and smooth underneath my hand, even though we're not really dealing with tipping material. So when I say it's smooth, I'm more talking about the fact that it doesn't have sharp edges in the writing. It doesn't cause my hand to fatigue through pages of writing, which is always a good sign. I do like to be able to sit down and write 2 or 3 pages without the pen making me suffer through any of that writing. Anytime a pen does that, I know it's really, for me, no good. Any pen that doesn't let you sit and write for long periods of time, if you do that, is going to be a problem. I like this pen. I find it fairly comfortable. It's just the weightiness, and the nib isn't my preference. But to be fair again to that, mostly the problem is I tend to write better with standard round nibs. Check these guys out to be able to try some of their nibs. Now for something a bit more standard in comparing writing size. I use Mnemosyne Blue to do this. Here's how it compares to a Jowo Extra Fine on the left, a medium on the right, in the center. Now, because it's an italic oblique, it writes very much like a broad in that it has a very broad downward stroke to it. And so with that, it is bound to be a very broad nib on the page, which you can see, but it adds a lot of flair to the writing, just like a stub nib would. But how does the writing size of this nib compare to the other nibs I've used? Looking at the writing of a MrPen Italix brand Chaplains Tankard with an oblique italic nib. Here it is next to a Noodler's Neponset with a music nib. A Jinhao 159 with a 1.1 stub. A Sailor 1911 with a music nib, which would be the same as a Tasha Spectrum with a music nib. And a Pilot Custom 912, also with a music nib. So it isn't a review without some size comparison. Here it is capped. Here it is uncapped. And here it is posted. The overall size of the pen, I want to call it just a little bit larger than average. It feels a little girthier in my hand than, say, the Lamy Vista or All-Star or the Safari, but that largely has to do with the design of their nib section. If I think about its size, it's not uncommon to a Jinhao X450, or it's not that different to a Jinhao X450. Let's clean this pen now that it's dirty. Be sure to check out the next pen review video where we look at the Jinhao 159. If you want to be able to support not just my channel, but any reviewer, then when you make a purchase, be sure to tell that retailer where you heard about it. Thanks for watching.